want to start by seeing if you have any questions because, as we both know, I don't stop for questions very often.
But you will from now on.
Yes. So, if anybody has any questions?
Any questions anybody may have? There are many questions that sometimes go unanswered because people are afraid to ask.
Look, a question.
The gentleman in the red.
I like to ask, when we do storytelling in Thai, but if we need or if we want to add second language into the same story, how do you recommend a technique or the practical doing in combination two languages at the same time in doing storytelling?
Yeah, a couple of different options that seem to work. One is phrase. So you say it in Thai and then you say it in Mandarin or whatever you're going to, so that phrase by phrase, they're understanding. Another way is not to try to translate the whole thing, but to translate to only put in specific words. So I tell a story that has a lot of Spanish words in it, and I explain just those words, and those are the only ones. But children are gaining that much Spanish vocabulary within the story. Another way is to have someone else, or to tell the story first in the mother tongue, Thai, and then tell it again with the exact same intonation and phrasing in the other, English? In English. So I've seen this done amazingly well, where someone will tell the story in the first language, say Thai, and tell it exactly in the same phrasing and intonation and with the exact same gestures as they're going to do it in the other language, so that when the children are listening to the story in the other language, they understand what's happening, and that can be very, very effective. So you might want to try, several different ways and see which one works for you. If you want them to gain vocabulary, maybe just doing the few words within the story may be the most effective, because they're not trying to translate everything all at once. But I've seen it work in lots of different ways, so those are some options.
We have a question over here. Sherry, you're right. Over here.
Over here? Yes.
I'm not sure whether I missed anything, but you doesn't seem to promote decoding. Decoding in reading. So how would a story promote reading, just like the heading or the title of the workshop? How would they learn how to read from what you told them? Or how would decoding fit in your storytelling? How would you promote reading?
Decoding doesn't fit into the storytelling. It's the only part of the things that you need to learn in order to read that you can't learn through storytelling. I would never claim that decoding can be learned that way. You can be motivated to learn to decode. You can gain vocabulary, you can gain understanding of story and story structure. You can understand all of the, you can learn how to visualize and be able to apply that, but no, you can't learn to decode that way. You can be motivated to learn to decode. Yes.
Okay, so it doesn't fit in. The
decoding
doesn't fit in the storytelling.
It does, in that you gain all the other things you need except for the decoding. I would never say that storytelling itself does. Reading aloud will help with the decoding, where you're actually making the connection between the print and the words that are being said. Yeah, I will never ever, you'll never hear me claim that storytelling by itself aids in decoding. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's pass it down.
if during the teacher is telling the story, but there are a few children interrupt, what should we do with that children?
When children interrupt when you're telling this story, sometimes it's because they don't understand and they have questions. And so if you can just go ahead and answer those questions within the story, you can often see the question in their eyes before they have a chance to interrupt. So you've said a word like, baby frog was frustrated. And they go. And before they have a chance to say, what's frustrated? You say, he was frustrated. And they go, oh, got it. You know, even if you just repeat it. Or, he was angry. If they don't understand angry, then you say, he was really, really mad. So you go back and you can go back. A lot of times you can see the question in their faces. That's one of the joys of storytelling, that you can actually read their faces and respond before they interrupt. But if they interrupt anyway, one of the ways that you can control that is because you can make eye contact. Eye contact is the absolute best disciplinary measure. So the moment that child starts interrupting, you make eye contact with that child. And you just keep telling the story to that child for a little while, and after a while they figure out you're not going to go away. And most of the time that will bring the interruption to a close. If it doesn't, sometimes I'll just lay my hand on their shoulder or just shake my head at them, you know, just to let them know later. You know, give them some kind of signal to let them know, you'll get it later, but I'm not going to stop the story for you. I try really hard not to stop the story. Bobby doesn't stop the story, because the flow of the story should not be interrupted. And then when the story's over, you can say, did you notice that even though somebody had their hand up and kept asking, I didn't stop? Because we don't interrupt a story. You know, you can let them know at that point.
Yes, there was an incident that I had in Chicago, Illinois, in the United States, and this is the ultimate gap in language translation. There were about 30 children who were totally deaf, could not hear at all. And their signer came in, and she stood on one side, and I stood here, and then I started performing. The signer started signing, and the children were watching the signer for about 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, they stopped looking at her. They all looked at me. The signer sat down. What's that about? Later on, the signer said, when I asked her, why did you sit down and stop signing? She said, they stopped watching me. Your facial expressions, your movement, your smile, the emotions that you put into the story, they just made my work useless. So I sat down because their focus was all on you with the animation and the facial expressions. So children key into that. Even when they cannot hear a word of language, they key into it.
Sometimes you can also weave the interruption into the story. So, you know, if a kid is making some kind of sound, you just say, and the rabbit kept on doing that, and it was really, you know, and then just use that and then move on. In Jonesboro, Tennessee, which is the National Storytelling Festival in the United States, there's this infamous train that goes through about 5 times a day. It's really loud, and it goes, whoa! I mean, it's
110 train cars.
You can't hear yourself speak. And the storytellers are up there, and they have all learned how to weave that interruption right into the story. Some of them just stop. They freeze in whatever attitude they're in, and they wait, which is really hard because it's a long train. Others just use that sound, and they weave it into the warp of the story.
The little boy was walking down the street, and a train came by.
Yeah.
And just put it right into the story.
It depends on the kind of interruption, but there are all different kinds of things you can do. And every once in a while, the interruption is so bad that, honestly, you just have to stop and say, we can't continue the story until everybody's quiet. And all the other children, the peer pressure is enormous. They'll go, Because they want to hear the story. So you use that peer pressure, just, I'll continue when everybody's quiet. Story can't continue until everybody's quiet. And all the other kids are going, shh, because they want the story to continue, and then you can go on.
That problem is more, for us, more prevalent. It is more constant in a public program like a library. When the parents come in with their children and they think their children are exceptional, can do anything they want, run amok in the library. And in a school situation, it's more of a controlled environment. And then it's not that much of a problem. And the teachers can then help to monitor children who are misbehaving. For the gentleman that talked about the words, that can be translated, there's a Spanish-American storyteller, for example, La Mariposa in Spanish, the butterfly, who will say, the story is La Mariposa, the butterfly. So now they get English, Spanish, and then they get movement at the same time.
Yeah. Also, the repetition, the action, if you can get those things into it when you're doing a story that's in two languages, that repetition, the action in the story really helps carry the meaning.
Yeah, even for you adults, you seem to have tuned in when that little girl was running from the gunny wheel, boogity, 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 boogity. There are 300 children who are doing the same thing when I'm telling it, boogity, 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 even with the shoulders.
Yeah, even when he's telling the older kids. Any other questions?
More questions?
Over here.
Oh.
Bobby.
Where? Hello. Where am I going? Oh.
Do you ever use like hand puppet to help as a prop, or how does it work?
I use hand puppets and finger puppets when I'm working with very young children, from 18 months up through 3 years. After that, I don't. That's just me. That doesn't mean I'm not giving you a rule. You just ask me what I do. When I'm with the 18-month-olds and the 24-month-olds, they need to have something to focus on. Those little puppets can really focus them. They also need a visual referent. If they don't know what a camel looks like and you're telling a story about a camel, they don't know. But if you have a puppet of a camel or a picture or a stuffed animal, they can focus on that. The older the children get, the less I use it, and then there comes a point where I don't use them at all because I want them to use their imagination. Also because I'm very well known for forgetting the puppets,
right here.
And the props.
Okay, I have one question. Because you said the prediction is really important for the student to guess what happened next. But sometimes we talk about the popular story. It's impossible if I change something, the end of the story, or do you think what to happen to do to let the student more funny?
A lot of times, Bobby and I both tell stories that are directly from books that the kids already know, or they're stories that the kids have been told, ever since they were little, and we don't tell them anything like the book. So what we do is, here's what I say. I found this story in a book. And I read it, 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 and I read it until it gets stuck inside my brain. But when it comes back out my mouth, it's changed. So this may not be the same as the version that you have read. And when you find it in a book, you can figure out what I changed. And so then they still don't know. They can't predict. They have to use that prediction again, to that skill, because they don't know what I'm going to do, or they never know what Bobby's going to do.
I am unpredictable.
And you know how children don't allow you to change the stories that they know? If you tried to tell the 3 little pigs without saying, little pig, let me come in, not by the hair of my chinny chin chin, you would be dead in the water. But if you say to them ahead of time, I'm going to change it, they give you permission. If you don't say it ahead of time and you change it, they will spend the entire story saying, you changed it, that was different, that's not the way my mommy told it to me, and it'll drive you nuts. Yeah.
Anyone else? Any more questions? Now's the time.
I think John has a question right there. The lights are right in our eyes. That's why we're going like this.
Jam Kwan is working the room in the back. Someone was just brushing their hair.
They're back there because they don't want anyone to see them.
We see you back there.
Okay. If there aren't any more questions, we have a question up here.
As a mother of 3-year-old daughter, I would like to have some recommendation. How can I, as a mother or parent, help in reading before she go to school? Like reading a story to her, start from when, where, and how often?
Read aloud every single day for at least 10 to 15 minutes every day. Stories that she likes, you know.
Reading with feeling and emotion. Facial expressions, just like the deaf children I had in Chicago, Illinois.
And you had said that your little girl is very active. One thing you need to know, it's not necessary for most children to sit still when they listen to stories or when they listen to you reading aloud. And if a child is kinesthetic, it's actually counterproductive for them to sit still. They can't sit still and learn. And so ask them to act out the story with you. You're reading the story, let them act it out. Stop and say, so what did Little Red Riding Hood look like when she was doing that? How was she carrying the basket? Show me how she was picking the flowers. So when you give them ways to act out the story, if they're kinesthetic, it's going to actually help them learn the story and pay attention longer. It's a productive way to move. They got to move anyway, and they're going to move anyway. So it's better to give them a productive way to do it.
Especially if they are musical intelligence. I'm not sure if your baby girl loves music or rhyming, but in the original Gunny Wolf story, The Blue Danube by... yeah, he was not there. No, that was my license that I put in. I embellished that. Da, 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 da. And 300 children will be conducting. Da, 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 da. Then I tell them later on about the music and the conductor. And so not only are they learning about classical music, they are now hearing something that they can now put into their memory banks, and it will help them flow through the story. Because it happens 3 times in the story, so they have 3 chances to conduct and to sing.
I also, when I'm reading aloud to children, I ask them to make the sounds that should happen in the story. Because then they really have to listen and make meaning of the words. And so, for instance, if I were reading them, I'm going to tell you a very boring story. Your job is to make it interesting by making the sounds. So, for instance, if I said the cow mooed, you would go, kind of, yeah. Okay, so let's say you're reading this story to your child and you ask them to make the sounds. I want you to make the sounds for me. The boy was walking through a muddy, mucky swamp.
Squish, 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 squish.
He heard a bird singing. He heard a frog.
Ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. Hop, hop.
He heard a snake. He saw a rock. He picked it up and threw it. It broke a window. He said, he decided to climb a tree. He slid out onto a branch. The branch broke. He fell into a lake. He went down, 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 down. He swam back up. He got out and shook himself off. He walked through the mud some more. He got to a rusty iron gate and he opened it. He walked up some creaky wooden steps. He rang the doorbell. He knocked on the door. The door squeaked open. There was an evil old witch standing there. She laughed at him. So he screamed. He went back down the creaky steps, through the rusty gate, through the muddy, mucky swamp, back home. Give yourselves a hand. A lot of the stories that we tell to children have lots of opportunities for sounds in this story, and by giving them that assignment to make the sounds as you're telling this or reading the story, it keeps them actively involved, and they have to be making meaning as you're telling the story. And they have to use their imagination. They have to really visualize so that they know what sounds would be there. So you're really helping with those emergent literacy skills. Does that answer your question? All that? Okay. Okay.
One or two more final questions we have? Oh, no. Sir.
It depends.
You mean after every story? During? Never during. Bad idea.
We don't. Yeah, we like for the whole flow to be there, but as a teaching tool, to stop and ask, "What do you think is going to happen next?" Can be a really good tool. As long as you, or to stop and say, "What do you think is going to happen next?" Write the ending of the story, or let's make up an ending together. So you might want to vary the way that they respond.
It's all
sometimes
in the style.
they'll just.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes you can just stop and say, "What do you think is going to happen next?" and get a few answers, and then say, "Nah," and keep on going. Sometimes you might want to say, "I'm going to stop it right here. I want you to think about what's going to happen next," and write the answer, make up the end of the story. Another time you might want to say, "Okay, let's decide together what's going to happen next," and make up a group ending to the story. So it's not always the same. But sometimes finish the story. Yeah. Go on through the whole story.
Let them know. Now, this story, we can ask questions and we can investigate and we can explore. But now on this story, it's time to listen.
Yeah.
And then let them get into storytelling hypnosis, where you keep telling that story till the eyes get big as dinner plates and the muscles in the bottom of the jaw drop. Storytelling hypnosis. That's what you want for stories that you want uninterrupted to the end. Then they can ask questions. Transition, another story.
Any other questions? All right.
Okay.
Do you remember that I taught you a story about a bear, a buzzard, a possum, and a spider? I want to quickly review that story because I'm going to give you an assignment. Let's review the story. It was dark. There was darkness, darkness, darkness. And the bear got tired of it, so he called a meeting of all the animals. He said, "Who will go? Who will get the light?" Who went first? What did Buzzard do with the light? What happened to his head? And there was darkness, darkness, darkness. Who went next? Possum. And what happened to Possum's eyes? What did Possum do with the light? What happened to her tail? Got naked. Who went last? What did they say to Spider? Too old, too forgetful? Okay. I do want to just stop for a second right here. Remember I said that we remember what's relevant to us? That's how our brains work? Yeah. When I tell you the story, what I say is, Bear said, "You're too little, you're too old, you're forgetful." When I ask kids, what did Bear say to Spider? The kids always say, "Too little." When I ask adults, you all said, "Too old." Oh. And it's just a great example of the way our brains work. We remember what's relevant. And I like to keep that in mind when I'm working with kids, because they're only going to remember what's relevant to them. Anyway, that's what they said. But Grandmother Spider had a plan. She wove a web, and she got some mud. She put the light in the mud. What happened to the mud on the way back? It was a ball. And she took the light and threw it into the sky. All right. Here's the assignment. Let's see. From here up. Boy, these groups are different now. So from about here up, in small groups, I want you to talk to each other about ways that you could use this story to teach math at whatever grade level that you work with. So if you work with a 3-year-old, think about how you could use the story to teach math to a 3-year-old. If you work with a 6th grader, an 11-year-old or 12-year-old, think about how you could use it to teach it at that age group. From here back in your groups, talk about how you could use that story to teach any kind of science concepts for your age group, whatever age group that you individually work with. But talk with people about it, because the more ideas you get, the better you are. From here back, you all are going to be doing language arts. Writing, reading, speaking, that kind of poetry. And from here up, you're doing social studies, history, geography, anything in that area. All right? Or character education. All right. So I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to talk with people, come up with great ideas, and then we're just going to ask 1 or 2 people in each of the big groups. You're going to find 1 or 2 people who will be brave enough. You don't have to even get up. We'll bring you the microphone, and you may speak in Thai. You don't even have to translate. Somebody will translate for us. Okay? So, get to work. Any of the groups need a little more time, or should we go ahead?
Language arts needs some more time.
Yeah, because they didn't understand the term. Okay. We would like at least one person from math, and at least one person from social studies, and at least one person from science, and at least one person from the reading, writing group back there to report. If more people want to report, that's fine. We're not going to cut off any reports. Because the ideas that you guys come up with are way better than we can come up with. You know your curriculum, and you know your kids. And the more that you exchange ideas, the better your thinking about this will be. So, what group would like to report first? All right. We have a reporter.
Brave souls.
I can start here. อยู่ตรงนี้ก็ได้ค่ะท่านอาจารย์ค่ะ We are math group, and we focus on the younger kids around grade 1. So we can teach them that how many animals are there in the story. So there are 4 animals. And all these animals, how many legs are there all together? So they can add. Or before even that, so maybe the first animal, how many legs? And the second animal, the third, the fourth, and then put all the legs together. So how many legs are there in the whole story? And then we can go for the first animal who travels to get the light, how long the distance is. If we say like, okay, one kilometer, and it takes 1 kilometer to travel and another kilometer to travel back, and the second animal. So how many kilometers in total for the traveling of all the animals? So we can teach them addition, put together. And if they can go to the time, how much time it takes for the animal to get the light, and the second animal, and again we can add them up as well. And then we discuss a little bit and maybe make it like a little bit more difficult, more harder, maybe older group. It can be like, okay, one step for the first animal.
The buzzard.
The
buzzard.
The possum. Okay. Let's say one step be like 1 foot,
Okay.
and the spider can be just a fourth. And then how many steps it's gonna be, and then they can calculate that.
Wow, that's getting hard.
That's gonna be hard. Okay, that's
excellent.
Thank you.
We have another reporter back here, Bobby.
The gentleman in red.
I'm not going to give everyone the answer because I'm not a teacher, but I'm a daddy of my little girl, and it's just my curiosity that if we teach math to our child using or by counting a number of animals' legs, do we need to show them a picture of animals we mentioned too, or we need to allow them to visualize of numbers of animals that we mentioned to them before, or just let them know of
you could generalize in that. Do you notice that there's a bird that's got 2 legs, a mammal that has 4 legs, and a spider that has 8 legs? And so you could generalize how many legs do birds have? Most birds have 2 legs. Yeah. Mammals, now you've got a lot of different kinds. There are some that have 2 legs, like us, and most have 4 legs, and then hardly any have just 1 though, or 8. So you could generalize for the most part, and all spiders have 8 legs. Yeah. Another thing you can do, I don't know that if in Thai, do you have ordinal numbers, like first, second, third? Yeah, and so another thing you can teach with this story is ordinal numbers, first, second, and third. Buzzard went first. Possum went second. I know this story. And spider went third. So you can use that. Okay, any other math ones? All right, do we have any reporters over here? We have a reporter.
One? Yeah.
I'll volunteer to do it.
Okay.
All right. Our group is dealing with social studies. And then so it is divided into like 3 categories. So first of all, we are talking about history. All right. But that history will be more like the legendary history. So we'll teach the children about the original, not the real original, I mean legendary, the original of the buzzard, right? And then how the head gets kind of bald. And other than that, then the bosom. And then why,
okay.
I'm sorry. And then, so how does it, the tails get naked? Stuff like that. And then why does the eyes get red and all those. And then, but however, one thing that we can kind of add into this study is that we don't have all these type, I mean like especially possum, we don't have that in our culture. So it's interesting to point that out as well. And
but
then,
is there an animal in your culture that does have a naked tail?
Naked tail? มีไหมสัตว์อะไรที่หาง
Rat. A rat
Yeah.
or a mouse,
Oh,
so
okay.
you could use
All right.
that animal.
Okay.
And what I've noticed with children if they don't know the animal, they don't know a possum. They don't know that in America either. And when they retell the story, they'll tell it with a rat most of the time.
Okay,
And
use the rat.
And instead of saying buzzard, they say eagle because all children in America know the bald eagle. So what they do is conceptualize. And they put in an animal that they know works. Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that.
All right. And then also, because Stangso mentioned that one too, because the vocabularies in our culture, we don't know the word buzzard. We only know vulture.
Right.
Yes, that's the one thing. And as for the history side, that's the history side, right? And then for the social side. And then we are talking about the cooperation, the community, and then how each one can help each other out, how being volunteers can help ease out the problem. And then as for the, what else, the geography side, so we can, like a lot of the animals that you mentioned in the story, it's not belonging to the Asian, our territory. It's just only like North America or somewhere else. And then so they can see like a different type of animals, even though we say that we have bears, but we hardly see them. So bears, and then the buzzard, what else?
Possum.
Then the possum, and then
spider.
Except for the spider, yes.
Spider's pretty universal. Yeah. Great.
That's almost all.
That's excellent. Give her a hand.
Thank you.
One of the things that I did not tell you when I introduced the story is that this framework for a story is actually used all over the world. And there's an Australian version of it with Australian animals. There's an Athabascan version of it with Alaskan animals. There are 4 or 5 versions from Africa with animals indigenous to different parts of Africa. There's a Brazilian version of the story, and it all uses the same framework. So you could also kind of compare and contrast different cultural variants of this kind of story. Or compare and contrast different cultural variants of different stories about how the sun got to be in the sky. And there are how and why stories about that in every culture. So there are lots of different kinds of things you could do with it. Yes. If I just give you that information, which I didn't.
So it's very permissible to use animals indigenous to your culture. That is the magic of storytelling. You can interchange stories. Stories like water. It conforms to the shape of the container. So, math, more exact. You cannot teach children that 2 and 2 equals 5. It does not work out. But with story, you can flow and mold it like clay.
All right. Anybody else reporting in the social studies area? What about...
How we doing back there in language arts? Are you in the house? Oh, doesn't look too good.
Let's try science. Give them a few more minutes. Science, do you have a reporter? Yes, we do.
We have science, and we think that is the animal. We will focus on habitat of the animal, or food chain, or life cycle. Or if you want to learn about plants, then we have you can learn shape of the leaves, or maybe a species, of the plants. And we can look for the season, spring or winters, and what else? The season. We can talk about the season too, right? And another one is environment.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's all and another one is how the bird can fly.
Oh,
because you talk about the bird a lot. That's all we discuss about that. Yeah.
You can talk about different adaptations. Why does a naked tail help a possum?
That's right, yeah.
Actually, possums hang by the tail upside down when they sleep.
All right, yeah.
Believe it or not.
Yeah.
And why are buzzards' heads bald? Because they are scavengers. They put their heads down into the carcasses of dead things, and if they don't have feathers, they don't bring up all of that, the bacteria and germs.
Because they eat germ a lot, right?
Right, and so the adaptations have some explanations and why do those animals look the way they do.
Right,
So that's something you could look
yeah.
at. Yeah. Thank you. Give her a
all.
hand. All right, language arts. You want a little help? Okay.
When you say language art, I assume study of the English, maybe, in the story.
Any language. So you could do it in Thai.
World
Okay.
language.
Yeah.
Okay, so how you can use the story to teach maybe the language, the English language. One idea is you talk about animals, and you can and the action that the animals make. So, for example, a spider crawls, a bird flaps their wings, maybe possum wags its tail. So you can maybe teach something about action verbs
Yes.
of
Descriptive
animals.
verbs.
So use story to teach about action verbs. Maybe you might want to teach about past tense and get the kids to finish the story, or you can read the story again, but this time the children can help you with finishing the story. So the spider went to get the light, or the bird flew. So you get the students to say the verbs. If you're studying, you can use the story to finish the sentence,
Right.
for the teacher. Or another activity you could do after the story is you could ask the student, what was the light? And I think the light ended up as the sun, but you can say, okay, so if this room, so you can quickly switch off the light in the classroom, the light in the classroom, and you can say, okay, what can we use to make light in the classroom? So you can elicit words like lamp, torch, so you can use the story to talk about vocabulary. So that's just fun.
Good.
Sure.
Okay. Yes, we have another volunteer over here. Where's our... See, the ideas that you come up with are far better than anything we can share because they're things that really, truly work for you.
We are in science group again. We focus on kindergarten children. One activity is about day and night.
Oh,
To
yes.
notice about the days and nights and the
Days and night.
and the
Why people are sleeping between the night, and why they are awakened during the day. Okay.
the activity during the day and during the night that you can do. And we would teach about the shape of different kind of animals that have wings, animals that have 2 legs, 4 legs, and 8 legs, how they move. So maybe the children can act that.
Yeah.
And also, if they notice about the spider webs, you mentioned that the webs could be in the sun shape, but in the environment, maybe they notice that webs have different kind of shape.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we will talk about the importance of the web, the spider web. In fact, the spider is predator, right? And she used her web to catch the insect, right? She is actually the predator. She is only small, but she is predator. So maybe we will talk about animal life. We will teach the children about some kind of easy thing to the children because we consider about the age of the children. Okay.
Exactly. Great.
Last one is the main idea.
Yes.
The main idea about the story is about light. So we would ask them what originate light from candles and light bulbs and different kind of bulbs. Maybe they give different ray of light. So for children to notice it.
Great. The magic of story is that it engages the children. So once you have engaged them, their imagination, with a story like this, you can go off in all different directions as you just demonstrated because you've engaged them. If they're not engaged in what you're teaching them, they're not going to learn a single thing, period. It doesn't matter how clever your lesson plan looks on paper. If they're not engaged, they're not going to learn. But if they're engaged, and kids do get engaged in these stories, then you can take that as the jumping off place and you can teach all kinds of things. I use this story for teaching creative writing. And we use the framework of the story. They make up their own stories. From kindergarten up through 5th grade, they can make up stories on this. Kindergartners get together in groups of 4. And they decide where is the sun at the beginning of the story, which animal knows where the sun is. If you notice, there's bear knows, but he doesn't do anything about it except get everybody together. Who goes first? Who goes, and why does he fail? Who goes second? Why does he fail? Who goes third? How does he succeed? And they make up the story, and then they put on a play for us of their story. We can do that in about 15 minutes flat. Kindergartners can make up stories like that. In 2nd grade, they write the stories. They individually make up stories. They write their stories. They have dialogue in the story. They have to use creative verbs. They are not allowed to say, spider went. They have to say spider crawled, or spider ran, or spider climbed, but they can't say went. They have to use verbs about the way the animals speak. Bear growled. Spider squeaked. But they're not allowed to just use said because it's boring. It doesn't describe anything. And the way I teach them those things is that they have to make the voices of the animals. They have to walk around as the animals and move as the animals and then translate that into words on a page. Because written language is a translation process. It's translating from verbal kinesthetic, which is our first language, to words on a page. So if I just say, Rah! Well, you can hear it. You know what it sounds like. You know what it looks like. But if I write down, Rah, does that tell you anything? No, I have to translate it. Bear growled, Rah! And then you have it. So it's a translation process, and I help the children because they're engaged in story, and they're engaged in storytelling. They can write amazing stories. By 5th grade, when they're writing the stories, they have to do the how and why part as well. You know, that's how Buzzard got his bald head. So when they do it, it just gets more and more complex. But there's so many ways that you can use story to teach because story engages. Bobby,
speaking of
how else can you use story to teach?
Story can be used to teach in a very profound way, of which we will demonstrate as we wind down. And I open the morning by offering you peace and blessings. And we come to you in peace, and we will leave you in peace. But the blessing part is that we did start very early this morning, and therefore, to compensate for you, the blessing is we will let you go a little bit early this afternoon. If there's a blessing. Some that would like to take some more photographs, we'll stay around, or chat, we can do that also. But for those that would like to listen to how story can be used in social studies, no matter what age group, with science, math, all those things that you mentioned. Here is an excerpt of a true life story that happened in the United States around the year 1804 and 1805. when the explorers went out to explore this new territory that people call America. There were some indigenous people there who had been living there for about 10,000 years. And then all of a sudden these explorers started discovering this territory, but they also discovered some things that they did not count on discovering. The animals of the natural world in North America. Meriwether Lewis, William Clark, they came with about 30 other men from Newfoundland, and they had an Indian woman there from the Shoshone Nation. Some people call her Sacagawea, but the Indians in America called her Sacagawea. And in North Dakota, in America, 1805, when this big group in the Lewis and Clark expedition were going toward the Pacific coast in Oregon, the Indians of North Dakota warned them of some things about the animals. When they were leaving St. Louis, Missouri, heading up the Missouri River, they were warned about some tiny little animals that drink blood. They were called mosquitoes. So for all these children around the world who think history is boring, history is lame, I give them this. Here's an excerpt of a 1-hour program. Just a snippet. When the Lewis and Clark men were going up the Missouri River, some of the men got into summertime and they got very hot. Little did they know that something was about to happen they did not count on, because all of a sudden the men heard a noise. One of the men said, "What is that noise?" One of the other more experienced men said, "Be afraid. Be very afraid." They said, "Why?" Looked upriver. They looked upriver, and a cloud of mosquitoes were coming at the men. So many mosquitoes, they formed a black cloud. One guy said, "They're coming this way." And it wasn't the male mosquitoes that bite. They are vegetarian. They were all somewhere drinking plant nectar. It was the female mosquitoes that drink the blood. They need that blood. They need that protein for their eggs. And they got the men. They come to the men like overcoats. And one of the men said, "Get out the cooking grease. Get out the cooking grease." Cooking grease? We're not cooking. Put on your body as an insect repellent. What? Do it. Okay. So the men rubbed cooking grease all over their bare skins, and it worked. It worked! The mosquitoes couldn't get through the grease to bite the men anymore, but right about then they felt like big cuts of beef. Yee-haw! And then if they didn't want grease on them in 95-degree weather, they sat near the campfire and let the smoke blow the mosquitoes away. Mosquitoes hated smoke, and they left. But the lungs of the men, they suffered. How you doing? I'm doing good. Not getting bit. You trade one comfort for the other. Then, later on, a much bigger animal encountered them, as I mentioned, in North Dakota. The Indians warned the Lewis and Clark men, "Beware of the grizzly bear. He is out of hibernation. He is looking for food." They say, "Yeah, right, whatever." The Indians warned them again, "Beware of the grizzly bear, my friend. He is out of hibernation. He is now looking for food in the springtime." The men said, "We are not afraid of any grizzly bears. We have flintlock rifles. Okay? We don't need primitive weapons like you Indians. Bows and arrows, spears. Let me tell you about that rifle they had, flintlock. You shoot one time. One time, you have to reload. Rifle goes on the ground. You take your gunpowder. You want some gunpowder into the barrel. You take a little bullet ball in a rag, shove it in with your finger. You take a stick called the ramrod, shove it down real good. Put the ramrod back in place. Hold back back the barrel, pull back your hammer. Make sure there is gunpowder in the pan around the flintstone to make the spark. Shoot, reload. It takes a half a minute to reload after one shot. There were 10 men up in Montana in North Dakota looking for a grizzly bear, talking about, I can't wait till I see me a grizzly bear. Be careful what you pray for. You might get it. Because the next thing the men knew, out of the pine woods, a grizzly bear rose up at them. It stood about this tall. It weighed about 850 pounds. It had blonde fur, foam coming out of his mouth, and the men shot him 10 times, and he did not die. Did not give them time to reload their weapons either. 4 men said, hit him, pop, 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 pop. The bear attacked. 4 men hit him, pop, 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 pop. The bear attacked. Hit him, 2 more, pop, pop. The bear kept coming. He's still coming. The bear was mad. They were running through the woods. They got to a bluff. It was a 20-foot drop down to the river. Go in the river. The men jumped in the river. The bear came in too. He can swim. Oh, that bear was mad. Finally, the bear started bleeding to death. He climbed up on a sandbar. He was climbing at the men doing the doggy paddle. Finally, after about half an hour, the bear fell over. The men crawled out the river. You think he's dead? Somebody said, I don't know. I'm not a doctor. Kick him. You kick him. One of the men said, I'll kick him. He's dead. So they took out their hunting knives. They did an autopsy. Cut up in that grizzly bear. And the men found out they had shot him indeed 10 times in the brain, the heart, and the lungs. 10 shots with a rifle. Brain, heart, and lungs. That thing still chased 33 men, a woman, a big old black dog into the river. From that moment on, the men had the utmost of respect for the natural world. When children hear that, they do that big-eyed, open-mouth thing because they know the power of nature. A lot of people think guns are all powerful. Depends on what you come up after. And that thing about the grease, they were indeed cooking with grease. But it was the first form of insect repellent that the Indians taught them to use. So just from the natural world, the Indians taught these white men how to survive. This is how it can be used as a lesson plan as we wind down.
So, yeah. Bobby goes into schools and does that as a 45-minute performance. And for most children, when they hear it, it's the first time they've heard that information. It's as new to them as it was to you. And in schools, the children basically hate history. So he goes in and he does that, and when he's finished, it's a 45-minute show. It takes another 20 minutes for him to answer questions because the kids are so engaged. They are so curious. And you know, if you can provoke curiosity, you will evoke learning. If children are curious, they will go out and they will learn. If they're not curious and they're not engaged, they're not going to learn much. So Bobby gets them curious. Children will absolutely demand to go into the library and read about the Lewis and Clark expedition because of what he has taught them. I can go into a school 3 or 4 weeks or months later and ask them questions about the expedition. If he said it in his talk, they remember it. So I have them do first-person narratives. I give them information about the other 32 explorers, and they have to choose. Each student chooses one of the explorers to do research on. They write their own first-person narrative. They have to have facts in it. They become the explorer. They have to learn how that person talked and how that person walked and what they carried, and then they put on their own first-person narrative. When they do this, and I've done it with 4th graders, 6th graders, 8th graders, they fight to get enough information. They'll grab at the information because they want it so badly. And then when they put on their show, then the other students ask them questions, and they can answer them. Peer teaching, which is what that turns into. When student teaches student, that's the most powerful kind of teaching. And story allows you to do it. Story really truly is one of the most powerful tools you will use in the classroom. Story helps you teach. So we want to thank you all for allowing us to come and share our passion with you, because stories really will help you in the classroom. Thank you all.